There are things we carry for so long we don't even name them anymore. Not because they've disappeared, but because they've stayed long enough to feel familiar. Like an old chair in the corner of a room, you don't notice it every day, but it's always there, quietly taking up its own space. For Taurus, this tends to happen almost naturally. You're not someone who gives up easily. You're not someone who walks away halfway through. Once you place your hands on something, you tend to stay a little longer than most. Not because you don't get tired, but because you understand the value of seeing things through. And maybe because of that, there are things you keep holding on to, not really because they still fit your life, but because you once gave so much to them. A promise, a relationship, a path you started a long time ago. On the surface, everything still looks fine. You wake up each morning. You do what needs to be done. You keep a rhythm that, from the outside, might seem like everything is moving in the right direction. But deep down, only you can feel it's something very subtle, very quiet, gently pulling you back. Not a strong force. Not something that stops you right away. It feels more like a thin thread, wrapped loosely around your wrist. You keep moving forward. But with every step, there's a slight resistance. And over time, that slight resistance becomes the thing that wears you down. I remember once sitting in a familiar cafe. Nothing unusual happened. Just an ordinary afternoon. Light resting softly on the table, the quiet sound of cups touching everything felt still. And in that moment, I noticed something strange. I wasn't excited anymore about a few things I had once tried so hard to hold on to. Not because they had gone bad. Not because anything had happened. Just, I wasn't the same version of myself who had started them. And that feeling at first is not easy to accept. Because for someone like Taurus, changing your mind halfway through can feel like breaking a promise to yourself. You believed in it. You committed to it. You gave it your time, your energy, and your trust. So when you begin to feel like you don't want to continue the same way, a part of you quietly asks, am I giving up? And that question isn't easy to answer. Because the line between persistence and holding on too long can be very thin. You can keep doing something for years and call it dedication. But from another angle, it might simply mean you haven't allowed yourself to set it down. And there's something I've noticed after watching people with strong Taurus energy over time. They don't let go easily. But when something inside them starts to feel out of rhythm, that feeling doesn't disappear. It doesn't shout. It doesn't create pressure right away. But it stays like a very quiet whisper. While you're working, while you're talking to someone, even in your most silent moments, it shows up. Not asking you to change immediately. Not forcing a decision. Just gently reminding you something might not feel the same anymore. And if you listen closely, you may begin to notice what's exhausting you isn't the things you do every day. It's the feeling that you're still carrying something that has already served its purpose, but hasn't been put down. It's like carrying a bag of groceries home. At first, it doesn't feel heavy. You even think, I've got this. But if you keep holding that bag without setting it down, without unpacking it, without giving your hands a rest even if it's not that heavy, your arm will start to ache. Not because you're weak, but because you've been holding it for too long. And maybe this debt we're talking about isn't something obvious. It's not always money. It's not always a clear responsibility. Sometimes it's just a feeling that you should keep going, that you've come too far to stop, that if you let go something about it won't feel right anymore. But something that doesn't get said often to Taurus is this. There are things that when you release them, you're not losing them. You're simply returning them to the time they belong to. And maybe the reason you've been feeling slowed down lately isn't because you haven't done enough, but because you're still carrying something that no longer belongs to where you're going next. There's no need to rush an answer. No need to change everything all at once. Just in a quiet moment, when things feel still enough, you might gently ask yourself, is there something I'm still holding just because I've held it for so long? And sometimes that question alone is already a beginning, and sometimes that beginning isn't loud in the way we expect. It doesn't feel like a big decision. It doesn't come as a clear moment you can point to and say, "This is where everything changed." It feels more like a tiny crack on a surface you've known for a long time. It doesn't break anything apart right away, but it's enough to let a little light through. You keep going as usual. You still do what you've always done. You still hold on to what you once chose to hold. And yet somewhere in that quiet space, you begin to notice you're not holding it with the same feeling anymore. It's not boredom. It's not that it lost its value. It's just, there's a slight distance now between you and the thing itself. Like putting on a shirt that once fit you perfectly. It's still the same shirt, same fabric, same memories stitched into it. But somehow it doesn't sit on you the same way anymore, and you can't quite explain why. For Taurus, that feeling can be confusing, because you're used to trusting what's steady. You're used to building things slowly, holding them with care, keeping them intact. So when something begins to feel just slightly out of rhythm, you don't rush to let go. You stay a little longer. You watch a little closer. You ask yourself a few more questions. Am I just tired? Maybe I should give it a little more time. And more often than not, you choose to continue. Not because you don't notice the shift, but because you believe that if something has been with you this long, it might deserve another chance. But over time, that just a little more dot quietly stretches further than you expected. You don't remember exactly when you started holding on out of habit. You don't notice the precise moment when "I want to stay" turns into "I'm still here because I've always been here." And that's when things begin to feel heavy in a very particular way. Not an obvious weight, not something that exhausts you all at once. It's more like walking in a pair of shoes that are just slightly too tight. You can still walk, you can still move forward, but with every step there's a small, quiet discomfort. At first, you ignore it. Then you get used to it. And eventually you almost forget it's even there. Until you finally take them off. And in that moment, you realize how far you've walked inside something that never truly felt right. Maybe what you've been holding on to is something like that. No one is asking you to carry it. No one is standing there demanding you keep going. You've just grown so used to holding it that letting go feels more unfamiliar than continuing. And there's something interesting about that. When an action is repeated long enough, it stops needing a reason. You don't have to remind yourself why you're still here. You don't have to explain why you keep going. You just do it, like a reflex, like checking your phone when there are no notifications, or turning down a familiar street even when you don't need to go that way. Your body remembers. Your mind follows. And in that memory, some things stop being questioned. But right there, something very subtle begins to shift. Not that you suddenly let go. Not that you turn away from everything. Just you start seeing it with a different kind of attention. Not exactly the same as before. You begin to notice small details you once overlooked. Feelings that were always there but never fully named. And sometimes a shift in perspective alone is enough to let something start moving. There's no need to decide right away. No need to do anything dramatic. Just to see a little more clearly. To notice that maybe what you're holding on to is no longer coming from love. No longer coming from alignment, but simply because you've grown used to not letting go. And recognizing that, in a very quiet way, is already a very different step forward. And maybe what makes that step so different isn't how far you've come, but the fact that you allowed yourself to pause, even if only for a moment. Because sometimes, stopping doesn't feel comforting right away. It's not like finishing something and finally letting out a deep breath. It feels more like stepping out of a room you've been in for a long time. The light outside feels a little too bright, the air slightly unfamiliar. You just stand there, not quite ready to move forward, but not turning back either. Just still. And that kind of stillness is rarer than it seems. Because when you're used to always doing something, always keeping a steady rhythm, always having a next step in mind. Silence isn't something you naturally reach for. It becomes something you quietly avoid. Not because it's frightening, but because it's unfamiliar. I remember once seeing an empty lot after an old house had been taken down. No walls, no roof. Just the ground and a few faint traces of what used to be there. At first glance, it felt like something was missing. But the longer I stood there, the feeling shifted. Nothing was blocking the space anymore. The wind moved through more freely. The light stretched further across the ground, and somehow the sky felt closer. Maybe when you set something down, you're standing in a space like that. No old structure to lean on. No familiar rhythm to follow. Just you in a wider space than you're used to. At first, you may not know what to do with it. You might feel the urge to fill it right away. To add something new. To start another plan. To move towards something else just to feel like you're still going somewhere. But if you don't rush, if you give yourself a little time to stay in that space, without needing to turn it into anything, something very subtle begins to unfold. You start noticing things you hadn't paid attention to before. The quiet doesn't feel as uncomfortable. Your breath slows, no longer pulled forward by the pressure of what comes next. And sometimes you begin to realize something unexpected. In the moments when you're not trying to hold on to anything, your body feels lighter. Not in a floating kind of way, but in a way that feels unburdened. Like taking off a backpack after a long day, setting it down and suddenly noticing your shoulders have shifted. More open. More at ease. You don't have to try to feel that difference. It arrives on its own. And slowly, that empty space begins to feel like a place you can stay in. Not to escape anything. Not to search for something. Just to be there. And within that simple kind of presence, a quiet clarity starts to take shape. Not answers right away. Not a clear direction. But a sense that you're beginning to understand yourself a little more. You start to notice what makes you feel lighter. What quietly tightens something inside you, even when there's no obvious reason. And as you begin to see these small things, more clearly, another realization begins to settle in. Not every empty space needs to be filled. Some spaces are meant to stay open, so that something else can arrive naturally when you're ready. No forcing, no rushing, just allowing it to come in its own way. And maybe in that space you once thought was missing something. There's been a different kind of fullness quietly forming all along. Not the kind that comes from having more, but the kind that comes when you're no longer carrying so much with you. And maybe right there, at that point, something very subtle begins to shift. Not that you suddenly have more. Not that life becomes easier in a way you can clearly see. Just everything around you feels a little lighter. In a way that's hard to explain. Like opening a window early in the morning, the air moves in. Quietly, but enough for you to notice the room has changed. You're still you. Still living the same life. Still seeing the same people, walking the same roads. But the way you respond doesn't feel the same anymore. Things that used to tighten something inside you now, you pause a little longer before reacting. Not because you're trying to control yourself, but because something within you is no longer stretched so tight. Like a string that's been held under tension for too long, now loosened, just enough. It doesn't snap back the same way when something touches it. There's a softness now. A little space for things to pass through. And in that space, you begin to see more clearly what you once overlooked. A conversation feels lighter, no need to prove you're right. A small opportunity appears, and you don't feel the need to grab it right away, just to sit with it and see if it truly fits. An afternoon passes, nothing special happens yet. Somehow, it feels quietly good. From the outside, no one may notice any of this. But for you, it's enough to feel something has shifted. Not a big happiness. Not a dramatic change. Just a kind of steady calm. And sometimes that quiet steadiness feels like something you've been searching for without ever naming it. There's something interesting here. When you stop trying to hold everything in place, you begin to realize not everything needs to be held onto. Some things, when you loosen your grip, stay more naturally. Not because you're holding tight, but because they truly belong to your life as it is now. And some things simply drift away. No big decision. No difficult conversation. Just you're no longer holding them, and they move on. Lightly, like a leaf letting go of a branch when the time feels right. You don't have to force it to fall. You don't have to keep it there. You just let things move in their own rhythm. And somewhere along the way, a very quiet feeling begins to form. You start to notice you're no longer trying so hard to make everything work. You're not always thinking about the next step, not constantly wondering if you've done enough. Instead, there's a small space between your thoughts, a space wide enough to notice where you are, how you feel, and what truly matters to you right now. Maybe this is how enough begins. Not when you have more, but when you no longer feel like something is missing. Not when everything is perfect, but when you stop trying to make everything perfect. Just allowing your life to move in its current rhythm, with a little more softness. And in that softness, you begin to see something clearly. Your strength was never about how much you could hold. It's about knowing when to open your hands. Not to lose something, but to stop holding so tightly. And when your hands are no longer clenched, you can finally feel what's truly there. Not the things you once tried to keep, but the ones that remain, even when you're no longer trying. Maybe it's a few relationships, a few small joys, a few paths not fully clear, but somehow they feel peaceful to think about. And none of these arrive all at once. They come quietly, scattered, soft, slow. Like the first drops of rain at the beginning of a season. Not enough to soak the ground right away, but enough to let you know something is shifting. And if you don't rush to search for something bigger, if you don't try to label what's happening, you may begin to notice these small changes are slowly shaping a deeper sense of wholeness. There's no need to name it. Just stay with it a little longer. And let it open in its own way. And as you begin to let things open in that way, without forcing, without pulling, without shaping an outcome ahead of time, something very quiet shifts inside you. You no longer walk with the feeling that you have to hold everything together at all costs. That sense that if you loosen your grip even slightly, everything might fall out of place, it begins to soften. And in its place, you start to feel a different kind of stability. Not the kind that comes from control, but the kind that grows from trusting your own rhythm. There are still days when you work, when you try, when you show up, but it doesn't feel like you're bracing yourself to prove something anymore. It's more like driving on a road you know well. You don't grip the wheel as tightly as you did in the beginning. Your hands are looser now, your gaze softer. You're still moving, still going forward, but you're no longer tense. And that absence of tension quietly opens up a wider space within you. It's not loud. There are no dramatic emotions. Just a sense that you're no longer fighting yourself. You don't feel the need to push yourself to continue something just because you've already come this far. You don't feel the need to hold on to a role just because this is who you've always been. There's a gentle kind of permission now. You allow yourself to change your mind. You allow yourself to slow down. You allow yourself to not always be certain. And interestingly, when you begin to allow that within yourself, life seems to respond in a quieter, different way. Not that everything becomes perfect. Not that challenges disappear. Just what no longer fits doesn't seem to cling to you the way it once did. You don't have to cut things off with force. You don't need a clear, final decision. You simply stop holding. And somehow, that's enough. It's like standing by a river, holding a small stone in your hand. You don't throw it away. You don't grip it tightly either. You just open your hand and let it fall. No loud sound. No dramatic moment. Just a small movement enough for your hand to feel lighter. And when your hand is lighter, you begin to notice you can hold other things with more ease. Not to replace what was there, but to experience something new. Maybe it's a small joy you once overlooked, a quiet moment you used to think was a waste of time. An idea that isn't fully clear yet, but somehow feels more like curiosity than pressure. These things aren't loud. They don't change you all at once. But they're there like very subtle signs that you're living in a different rhythm now. A rhythm no longer pulled by the past, and not pushed forward by the pressure of having to become someone. Just being here with what is in front of you. And somehow that's enough to begin. There may still be moments when you return to old habits, when you want to hold on a little longer, when it feels difficult to say no. That's okay, because change, especially for someone like Taurus, rarely arrives all at once. It feels more like you're slowly adjusting the way you stand, from a posture you've held for a long time to one that feels a little more natural. At first, it might feel unfamiliar, a little unsteady, but if you stay with it, if you allow yourself to feel it without rushing, your body begins to adjust on its own. No forcing needed. And then, at some point, you notice you're no longer trying to keep your balance. It's just there. The same way you begin to feel okay without needing a specific reason. Not because everything around you has become perfect, but because something inside you is no longer pulling so tightly. A pull you once thought was simply part of who you are. And when that pull softens, you don't feel like something is missing. Instead, a lighter space opens. A space where you can breathe deeper, listen more clearly, and choose more slowly. Maybe that's what Taurus is beginning to touch. Not becoming a completely different person. Not walking away from everything you've built. Just no longer needing to carry all of it. You keep what still nourishes you. And what has already served its time is allowed to leave quietly. No announcements. No explanations. Just you're no longer bracing. And within that absence of strain, there's a different kind of strength. Not the kind that comes from holding everything together, but the kind that comes from not needing to hold it anymore. A steadiness that rises from within. Soft. Slow. And enough to let you keep moving forward in your own way. No need to go faster. No need to have more. Just in rhythm with yourself.